Hello and welcome to my video about the endocannabinoid system. I'm Dr. Mark Lindholm and I'm glad you could join me. So when I first started investigating the CBD or full spectrum hemp oil products, I was really amazed at all of the research that showed these profound effects that it had, and in so many different areas. I honestly thought it sounds too good to be true. How could CBD or a full spectrum hemp oil affect the body in so many different ways? And how could it take one person and maybe drive up a low function in their body and take another person and in that exact same type of problem drive it down? So for example, how could it take somebody that had an immune issue and how could it make that immune system stronger so that they could fight off infection or maybe even ward off diseases? But how could that same product take somebody that had an immune system that was over-functioning, say attacking themselves with an autoimmune problem, and how could it drive it down? It just didn't make sense to me. But the beauty behind the way these products work is the endocannabinoid system. When you understand the endocannabinoid system, then it all makes sense. So first of all, let's just break down the word endocannabinoid system. It's amazing because it's one of the systems in our body, the only system I know of in our body that's actually named after the chemical that activates the system. So the cannabinoids were discovered first. And the history of this is actually Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, who is a researcher, an Israeli researcher, first isolated the THC and cannabidiol, or CBD is the abbreviation for cannabidiol, back in the 60s. But they really didn't discover the endocannabinoid system until the 1990s. So we knew about the chemical first and then found the system that chemical activated. So to break down the word endocannabinoid system, what it means is that we have an endogenous or a self-made ability to make cannabinoids in our body, and we have a system that these cannabinoids activate. You can think of the endocannabinoid system like a hormonal system because that's what it is. You have receptors that the cannabinoids indirectly bind to or directly bind to, depending on which cannabinoid we're talking about. And you have receptors for these cannabinoids in every system of your body. Now as the research is unfolding, what it's showing is that we have receptors in every system. Even in our circulating white blood cells, we have receptors. We have receptors in our brain and in our periphery. There's actually two different receptors that they've isolated. One is called the CB1 receptors, and those are found especially in the brain and the central nervous system. And then there's the CB2 receptors that are found outside of that, especially in our immune system and the rest of our body. And there's a lot of crossover between those two. But the way these work is you can think of like a hormonal system. So the difference though is that this is a relatively new discovery. Like I said, it wasn't discovered until the 1990s, which might not sound recent to you, but in medical terms, that's very recent. In contrast, we've known about the other hormonal systems like your thyroid and your testosterone, your estrogen, your progesterone. We've known about those hormones and those systems for centuries. So something that's only 25, 30 years old is still very new. As a matter of fact, something that I read on the internet was that out of the 200 and some medical schools in the United States, only like 20 of them are actually teaching about the endocannabinoid system. Back when I was in school, in chiropractic school, we didn't learn about the endocannabinoid system because it hadn't even been discovered, or it was just on the verge of the discovery of the endocannabinoid system. So how exactly does it work? What's cool about the endocannabinoid system is you have these receptors, like I said, throughout your body. But not only do you have these receptors, but we find that when there's a problem in the body, your body will actually upregulate and actually create more of these receptors in your tissues. The problem, though, is it's like having a bunch of locks without enough keys, because most of us are deficient in these endogenous cannabinoids. There's two of them, 2-AG and anandamide. But most of us don't have enough of these to bring this cannabinoid system online. But it's really amazing how God created this natural plant, the hemp plant, that provides phytocannabinoids. They provide a substitute for these endogenous cannabinoids that bind to these same receptors. The first substance that Dr. Raphael Mechoulam isolated was the THC component. And that's the component that's in marijuana that can make people high at a much higher level. You see, marijuana and hemp are related. They're you can kind of think of them like plant cousins, but they're not the same thing. Hemp is the original parent plant, and it has some THC and some CBD, or cannabidiol. But marijuana has been hybridized to produce 40 times or maybe 50, 60 times the amount of THC, so people can use it recreationally or use it to get high. A hemp plant or a full spectrum hemp product, a CBD oil, is not something that's going to make you high, but it's the cannabidiol that's really important. As a matter of fact, the research is showing that the cannabidiol, the CBD, gives you all of the benefits with none of the negatives or none of the side effects that you get from THC. As a matter of fact, a CBD or a cannabidiol product, a full spectrum hemp oil that has the THC removed, has all of the benefits with none of the side effects. You can't get addicted to a CBD product, you can't build up a tolerance, and you can't develop a dependency to a CBD product. As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization has an official statement, paper, that says that there's no addictive nature to a full spectrum hemp oil or CBD product. So the cannabidiol, or the CBD, indirectly binds to these receptors. And so I already mentioned that we have these receptors throughout our body. But the cool thing about the cannabidiol, or the CBD portion, is the way it indirectly binds to the receptors. It tends to have what's called a homeostasis effect, or it's the engine of homeostasis. So homeostasis is just a fancy word for balance. So what happens is that when it binds to the receptors, it can drive up low functions or it can lower high functions. And that's why we see so many different profound effects, because it tends to just have a balancing effect on our body. It's really hard to kind of wrap your mind around it. Maybe a good way to explain this is that there's a cannabinoid researcher. His name is Dr. David Allen, and he's an endocannabanoid expert and a cannabinoid researcher, and he's a retired cardiac surgeon. So his quote is that the discovery and implementation of the cannabinoid, research of the endocannabanoid system is the most important scientific discovery ever. And he believes that when that is implemented, that it will save more lives than the implementation of sterile surgical technique. And so if you're not familiar with that, what that means is that we used to not know that you had to wash your hands before you did surgery. You had to have a sterile environment. You had to autoclave your, all of your tools. Everything had to be clean. Centuries ago, unfortunately, people would die because a physician or a surgeon would accidentally transmit disease from one patient to another, not realizing that microorganisms existed. So that's a pretty bold statement to say that, first of all, that it is the most important discovery ever, and that it'll save more lives than the implementation of sterile surgical technique, because it's definitely sterile surgical technique has saved millions of lives. So thank you for being with me for this video about the endocannabanoid system, and I hope that fills in some of your gaps and gives you more information about this amazing system we have in our body. I want to mention, if you'd like more information, make sure you check out my website. It's cbddrmark.com. There's all kinds of great content there. You can sign up for my newsletter there. And please, if you have any comments, leave them below. I'd love to hear about your experience with CBD or any questions you might have about the endocannabanoid system. And also, please follow this channel. Subscribe below. Thanks. We can just cut that last part. That's fine.